Hmm? Ah!
Yeah, sure. I actually can share. I have I have only a grandparent left, which is my mom's mom, and I'm sorry, Harry, but I have to share this anecdote because I don't remember, she's maybe 75 or something like that, but she's like, I would sign up right now if I had her, when I'm 75, I could be like that. When I was in Switzerland, sometimes I would send her a text, hey, grandma, do you want to go grab a cup of coffee? I would get no answer. After a week, I would get a text, sorry, I just came back from Uruguay. All right. After a couple of months, same situation. Oh, sorry, I just got back from Ireland. So she's really savvy. She uses Facebook. She's really active. And whenever I go to Switzerland, obviously I want to see her. And she asks me, so what is it that you do? You have blogs, right? So every time she asks me, yeah, you have blogs. So kind of how can I put it in a nice way? Well, let's say that the way I put it, I say, when I want to refer to podcasting, I say that, yeah, I have a show similar to a radio show and I do interviews. That's kind of the way I put it for people who I know don't know the first thing about podcasting.
Podcast Junkies, episode 89. Welcome back, one and all. If you're new to the episode, you just literally stumbled upon this podcast for the first time. My name is Harry Duran. I'm the host of this amazing podcast where I talk to fantastic podcast hosts because I just have this deep-seated desire to learn more about the craft. There's so many fantastic people. I've been doing this for 2 years and it never gets old. These hour-plus conversations that I have with people really bring a smile to my face. And I'm just so excited to learn the ins and outs of what make these people tick, what motivated them to, that's a mouthful, to start the show, what keeps them going, and more importantly, a bit more about them personally. And I love peeling back the onion, so to speak, about these people, so that you can see that there's more to them than just podcast host. And a lot of times we go definitely past the hour mark because these are just such long and interesting conversations, and we just, the time flies, man. We just don't know when to stop, and sometimes that's a good thing. Last week we had a great conversation with Eric K. Johnson, aka the podcast talent coach. We covered everything from the Islanders to Magic to his love of hockey and growing up in the Midwest. It was just wide-ranging, and as these tend to go. And he was really someone that I had on my list for a while. He's in that podcast veteran category. He's just a wealth of information, guys, around podcasting. His podcast talent coach show is a must listen for me as a new podcaster. Relatively speaking, I'm always learning tips, and I think if you are interested in learning more about the craft, then I can't recommend his show enough. This week, we traveled the globe to Switzerland. Did you know that there's a place in Switzerland called Locarno? And that's where this week's guest is from, Yann Ilunga. He's the host of the 360 Degree Entrepreneur podcast. I'm not sure if there's a degree in there. I always get that confused. I think we talked about that as well. But he reached out to me to have me participate in a podcast mastery summit that's going on, that he's putting on, and I was happy to participate in that. And I've had him on my radar for a while because he's very prolific, and he's makes himself known in the podcast sphere. So I knew it was a matter of time before our paths crossed in more places than just Twitter and Facebook. And I'm happy to have had him on the show. He's really a fascinating guy. He speaks 5 different languages. We talked about his background in podcasting. This is not his first show. He's got another podcast on jazz music. He's just a really well-rounded, well-educated, really smart and interesting guy. I'm happy I got the opportunity to know him a little bit more, and I'm happy to support him in anything he's got going on. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Yann Ilunga. Stay tuned, as always, to the end of the show where I release the retention hashtag. And we have a new podcast sponsor. It's CastSource. CastSource handles all your podcast transcription needs. So I'll dive deep into the benefits of CastSource at the end of the show. But I wanted to give you a sneak peek into someone that I'm using now that I'm really happy with. And I think as far as a resource for podcasters, I've gotten to know the owner, and I'm really happy with them. So we'll dig into that a little bit more after the show. Enjoy the conversation with Yann, and I'll catch you soon. So Yann Ilunga, thank you so much for taking time to join us on Podcast Junkies.
Harry, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the show. So I have to tell you, it sounds a bit surreal to actually be part of the show now.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, it's always weird when you listen to a show for some time and then, the next time you listen to the show, you're actually part of the show. But I'm definitely thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Well, it sounds like you've been a fan of podcasts for a long time, and you're the host of your own show, 360 Degree Entrepreneur, or is it 360 Entrepreneur or 360 Degree Entrepreneur?
360 Entrepreneur, without the degree.
But it's interesting because the 360 stems from the concept of 360 degrees, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I was asked this question the other day. I was interviewed on another show, and also the host asked me, where does the name come from? And the idea for that is, if you think about the modern entrepreneur, kind of has to do quite many things by himself, even though we hear about the importance of outsourcing and focusing on one thing, which is true. But if you think about it, especially when starting out, you are doing so many things. You may create your own website. You take care of, creating your own product. You record your podcast. You wear many hats. So that's what I kind of came up with the name for the podcast and my business as well.
And where were you on the knowledge scale in terms of what you knew about podcasting when you first decided, or the thought came into your head that this is something you wanted to do?
I was at the very top. No, I'm kidding, of course. The 360 Entrepreneur is actually my second podcast. So I started it, I think, was it last March of 2015. And my very first podcast, which is in the music industry called The Jazz Spotlight, I started it in April of 2014. So I have a couple of years of experience really in the trenches. Now, in terms of answering your question, Harry, it's so that the way I came with podcasting, it's so that it's something I really wanted to do. I fell in love with the idea of podcasting. So I tapped into some connections I had because I'm originally from the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, and that's where my macaroni accent comes from. And for some years, I worked at a music festival. And because I speak 5 languages, and that's an international festival, I really had the opportunity to talk with many artists and do radio interviews, video interviews in different languages. So when I moved here, I thought, I have to say where is here. So here is Helsinki, Finland, where I've lived for almost 5 years. When I moved here, I wanted to do my master's, but I also wanted to do something. So I started to think, okay, what could I do? And then I remembered that I already had those connections. So I tried to figure out a way that I could leverage those to do something, because I created a blog, but I wanted to do more. And at some point I was studying for my exams or something like that, and I'm almost always wearing headphones. So I'm a huge fan of music, but I wanted to take a break from studying, a break from music. So I just Googled something random, and I came across this thing called podcasts. Had no idea what I was getting myself into. Long story short, I listened to a show. The guest was Pat Flynn, and I was like, "Ooh, this Pat guy sounds so interesting." So I went, check out his site, fell in love with this podcast, and I really got the idea of starting a show. So I started my first podcast, The Jazz Spotlight, really not knowing much about, all the, let's say, technical sides of podcasting and all these kind of things. And also when I launched, I didn't really have a strategy in place. I just launched. I didn't even know much about New and Noteworthy. I I didn't even pay attention to it that much, to be fair.
I think that's probably a benefit because, as you've probably heard by now, excuse me, the new Noteworthy tends to be a bit overrated. I know. There's a way there's a certain launch strategy that if you do, start with 3 episodes, and have strong content, there's a really good chance that you're going to make it in there. But I think that's really just like the starting point. It's really the first step, is what I tell people that I work with as well. It's nice and it looks good, but there's nothing to rest your laurels on, and it doesn't have the same impact as it did maybe three years ago when people were just getting started, and it really boosted people's shows. So I think as long as people don't rely on that too much, and the fact that you didn't know a lot about it, it was probably a benefit, because then you were relying on your other skills, which is your ability to connect with people. And but people can tell by the roster of folks that you've had on your show is that you've gone above and beyond in terms of trying to connect with people that are pretty well known in the podcasting space and the online marketing space.
Yeah, but it's so that when I launched the 360 Entrepreneur, I had a year of podcasting under my belt. So obviously I was very strategic about the way I launched. And, I hit number 1 in different categories of new and noteworthy. And, it's great. It's something that is definitely nice. It feels good, but it's not something that makes or breaks your podcast. Podcasting is way more than just the number 1 spot on iTunes. So, but in terms of the networking aspect, the relationship building aspect that you mentioned, you are right, and it's something I leveraged for both my podcasts, because the Jazz Spotlight is an interview-based only show, whereas the 360 Entrepreneur started as an interview-based show, but now I've also integrated solo sessions. So it's kind of a mix of both formats.
I imagine the benefit of having both is that you do things, or you try things in one or the other, and you say, hey, this approach seems to work for this specific show. Maybe I should try something similar with the other show. And I think they're both become, training areas for you to learn different aspects of what you can do to grow your show.
Yeah, you're right. And the fact that they are in so different niches, I really see that as an advantage, like you say, to maybe test things out and see what's working. And yeah, it's let's say that not many people, especially when starting out, should start 2 shows or 3 shows. It's important to start 1 show. But in my case, the reason why I started the second show is that as I got involved into the entrepreneurial and digital marketing space, I started to connect with some of those people. And I was thinking, okay, it would be great to have them on my podcast, or in some cases, if it was people who I had no connection with, I thought it would be nice to have an opportunity to talk with them. But the problem is that I was hosting a show about music business. So, it wasn't really their area of expertise. Then I came up with the idea of launching a second show, which is obviously in the entrepreneurial space. So it was way easier than to get those people on the podcast.
So when they tell you to start a show, they always say to go with something that that you're passionate about, and you picked a podcast about jazz. So how important is music for you?
Well, it's really important because, as I told you, I'm a huge music fan. And first of all, having a music business podcast also opens many doors. For example, sometimes I do also interviews at festivals. So, you really have the opportunity, for me as a music fan, first and foremost, I have the opportunity to listen to some great live music, and also to sometimes go behind the scenes, because I've had the opportunity that I've interviewed Grammy Award winning artists. I've interviewed, for example, the founder of a band called Kool and the Gang, which is from the 70s, very big one. I've interviewed Jamie Cullum and many, many others. So it's definitely, for me, it's so easy to keep going with both podcasts, because I talk about something I'm really passionate about, and whenever I have to record, it never feels like it's a task that I have to do. No, it feels like fun. So that's definitely something that helps also thinking about podcasting long term, because I think that's the idea.
So I can really resonate with what you say about music because I grew up more on the dance side, electronic music, house music. I'm a child of the '80s, so
I like house music too, by the way.
so I grew up DJing. You know, I have I don't know if you can see them in the background, but I have turntables and I have vinyl, and so it's been a real passion for me. And for me, it's almost like the soundtrack to my life. I always feel like I need something music related in my life. So I'm wondering if you could think back about your earliest recollection of when you realized that this was music was more than just background noise and it was something that you connected with.
You mean related to the podcast
No,
or
just
in general?
just you with connection to music and your love of jazz, or even if jazz wasn't your favorite type of music originally, like when did you realize
Exactly.
that music was important for you?
Yeah. And here, here's the thing that I have to say to you. Some people think that, well, he hosts a podcast called the Jazz Spotlight. So his favorite kind of music is jazz. Actually, it isn't because my favorite type of music is indie rock. But I worked at a jazz festival and that gave me the opportunity to really familiarize myself more with jazz. I listen to house music. I listen to a lot of different types of music. Now, to answer your question, I think it has also to do with my background because my major, both at the master level and bachelor level, was in media and communication. So because of that, it was relatively easy to I started to write, obviously, and you want to be writing about something you're passionate about, even when you're studying. And then when the opportunity presented itself where I had a friend who was working at a newspaper and back in my hometown in Switzerland called Locarno, and there was a summer festival and they were basically looking for freelancers. They would give you the free ticket, you would get to watch the concert, and then you would write an article. And, for me, it was great because I got to see one of my all-time favorite bands live, which is Jamiroquai. I saw like Santana, Paul Simon, Massive Attack. So really many different artists. And that was something that I started to think, man, this would be nice to do something like this, on a regular basis, because in that case it was a summer festival, so it was maybe 10 days or 2 weeks, and that was gone. And then when the opportunity with the jazz festival presented itself, it was pretty cool because even though the festival took place during the summer, the work revolving around it was like all year round. So during the rest of the year was maybe doing some research about artists and write their biographies for the website, do some interviews, stuff like that. But I definitely would say that my academic background really helped me, embrace music as something more than just a passion and really try to and be able to turn that into more than just a hobby.
Talk a little bit about growing up because I imagine when you first tell people that you're from Switzerland and they try to connect it with your accent, there's probably probably some disconnect and maybe maybe a bit of education would be helpful for the listener. If you can talk about what Locarno is like. And maybe even some historical background, because I don't think a lot of people know that there's actually an Italian region within Switzerland.
Right. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to spend a minute or two to promote Switzerland because I think that Switzerland is really a country that people know pretty much, everywhere in the world. Especially because of Hollywood movies, the banks, the watches, the chocolate and the cheese. But there is much more than that, obviously, and the Alps, yeah, but there is much more. So first of all, Switzerland is a very interesting country in the sense that we have 4 national languages and we have 4 kind of cultures. So we have a total of 26 regions, and Italian, so it's my mother tongue, is spoken in 2 regions. So you can do the math, it's a very minority language. And then we have another language called, I believe in English it would be called Romansh, which is spoken only in 1 region out of 26. So that counts almost nothing. And then we have French, which I don't remember in how many regions is spoken, but definitely more regions, maybe 6 or 7. And then we have German. And some regions that are called cantons, they are bilingual. So they speak both German and French. And that's, growing up specifically in the region I grew up with, so my canton is called Ticino. Basically, we can think of cantons like you would think about states over there in the US. So,
Okay.
you could say, yeah, Ticino is California. And that was an advantage for the fact that being from a kind of minority part of Switzerland, we had to learn French and German. So that is a big advantage because, I love traveling, and that really gives you access to so many people, even though nowadays quite almost everybody speaks a little bit English, but still that was great. Whereas if I had grown up in, let's say in Zurich, for example, I would have learned only obviously German and then French, and the Italian would have been optional. So when it comes to Switzerland, it's interesting because, for example, if I want to go home, visit my family, my friends, for me, it's closer to fly to Milan. So Milan-Locarno is actually, so Milan is in Italy, It's closer to do Milan-Locarno for me than do Zurich-Locarno. So it's interesting. And Swiss people, we are funny in the sense that we are really like, no. Kind of, we are really social people, but at the same time, we really like to highlight where we like our own identities. Here's what I mean. If somebody tells me, you speak Italian, so you're Italian, I'm gonna say, whoa, I'm not. If somebody from the Zurich area goes to Germany and says, I speak German, they would say, you are German. You would say, no. If somebody from the French-speaking part would be in France, they say, you're French, would be like, absolutely not. So we have this. And then obviously within the geographical boundaries, if it says, from Switzerland, from Zurich, like, no, I'm from the Italian-speaking part. So we have all these different components, but of course we have, things in common. And for many things, it's nice. And obviously I have to plug a couple of good things about Locarno because it's a very nice city. And I think that almost anybody says that about their hometown. But Locarno is really seen as a sort of exotic destination in Switzerland for the fact that we have a lake called Lake Maggiore. And for example, my father's home where I grew up is maybe a 15-minute drive from Italy. So you see that it's very easy also to travel. And, if you want to go to Italy, if you want to go to France, it takes maybe 2 hours and a half, 3 hours. So it's very easy to go around. And it's very beautiful because there is a lake. So for the summer, it's very popular. There are mountains, obviously. We have a nice castle. And lately, I would say maybe the last decade or so, also the entertainment scene is really grew up because the highlight of the year used to be we have an international film festival. And I remember when I grew up, they showed mainly international movies, so not really Hollywood movies, more like alternative kind of stuff. But the last few years is in terms of guests, there've been, I have a friend who works security there, and when there is the festival, he has been security for people like Andy Garcia, John Malkovich. There's been Harrison Ford. I think this last summer there was Amy Schumer and Edward Norton. So the film festival has really grown up. And then we also have this the music festival that I was talking about with Santana and company. That's called Moon and Stars Festival. So I was actually checking I still, obviously, even though I'm in Finland, I still follow the news. And I saw that this year's lineup for the Moon and Star Festival is pretty impressive. I remember they have Pharrell Williams. I was like, what? Pharrell playing in Locarno? And I would encourage everybody who is here with you and I, Harry, to just go on Google and type Locarno. So it's Locarno, because it's so that the festival, both the film festival and the music festival, takes place in a square. So you have to imagine, if you are the artist, you are on stage and there are buildings around you with offices and balconies. And sometimes there are some people who maybe work there. They invite friends. They may have a glass of wine during the concert. So the artist, sure, there is people there in the square, but he or she may also see people at the balconies. So it's kind of an interesting picture. But really, I would encourage anybody who has plans to go to Switzerland, if possible, to stop to Locarno or the Locarno area for even just a day or two. I'm sure they would love it. In the summer, of course.
Unless you're into skiing or snowboarding, then you can head on.
Right.
There must be some fantastic winter sports there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Locarno area, not really. I mean, you can go skiing, but let's say that, for example, I skied for over 20 years. I've never gone there in the Locarno area because it's not a very big skiing track or skiing place, anyways. But definitely, there's plenty of great places for skiing, snowboarding.
Well, that's great, Jan. You really painted a really engaging picture of Locarno and what it must have been like to grow up there. And I think that's really fantastic because there's so many people who don't get out of their hometown or don't like to travel or maybe never will. So I think just to hear sometimes about exotic locations for people who haven't been there, right? Of course, people who've never left the U.S. But I think it's nice because it sort of educates people, that they think, for example, the country of Switzerland, that they know exactly that it's not all chocolates and watches, and it just adds some layers, and not everything is what it seems on the surface, which is why I found that really, really fascinating. It's clear that education is important for you because that you speak 5 languages. You've gone to study your master's. I'm wondering if that's something that comes from your upbringing, or if that's something that was like drilled into you as important from your family.
Yeah, I would say it's so that I grew up in a household where my parents were divorced, but and some people, divorce, we can have a big talk about it, but for me it's something that I don't really feel bad about it because that's how I grew up with with my dad, with my sister. So that was my household. So for me it was it was relatively normal. But for example, if I think about my family, it's so that I can give you a bit of background that I think then it puts things into perspective. It's so that I'm Swiss. So my mom's side of the family, they come from Switzerland, and my grandpa came from, he was from Italy. Now he passed away. He was from Italy. So technically, I also have some Italian blood in me. And then my dad's side of the family, he comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He has lived in Switzerland for over 30 years, so now he's Swiss and everything. So basically, from his side of the family, there are many brothers around the world, some in the States, somebody in the UK. He has 2 brothers who are doctors, so obviously they studied. But my father, it's so that he was more the worker type of person. And also my sister, she didn't, for example, go to high school. She went to a different school. And I was, my father always talked about the importance of education and stuff like that. But if I think about my friends, really the guys and gals from the neighborhood, those I grew up with, I think I was the first in my circle of friends to go to university. If I really think about my close neighborhood without thinking about all the people I connected with afterwards. So I would just say that, it's something that my father talked about, the importance of education. And I had the luck that my father always talked about the fact that I was going to school for me, for my own kind of gain, and not for for him or to make him proud or make him happy. And that's something I really saw when I was doing my bachelor's at university level, because it's so that since I was there because I wanted to be there. See, if for example, for some reason I wasn't able to attend a class, for me it wasn't a big deal because I was like, hey, I know what I want, I know why I'm here. But some people were kind of forced to be there because they came from a family of, for example, architects or whatever, and they had pressure to be there. So for me, that was an advantage that, sure, my father was pretty tough. And I remember sometimes maybe getting some bad grades and try to say, well, everybody got bad grades. And he was like, well, I don't care about everybody. I care about you. But I I would say that really my father has really instilled in me the importance of education for yourself. So regardless of the level of education, regardless of the paper you get at the end of your studies, or even if you don't get any paper, because today with the internet we can educate ourselves in so many different ways. And we were talking about languages. Somebody could use something like a podcast to learn a language, or YouTube videos, something like that. So I would say just think about doing something that you really enjoy, that at the end of the day you're doing for you. So now we're talking about the studies. So if you feel that I'm 40 and I would like to start some university studies, it's never too late. In fact, I had some classmates at my bachelor's level who were older than my dad. So
so that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering if with everything that you've learned and the approach that you took, it sounds like the approach was, there wasn't, they talk about the carrot and the stick, so it's either you incentivize people, two different ways, but it seems like you had more of the carrot approach where you saw what was possible because of the education, as opposed to being, stressed out because, you have to get good grades. And if you don't, a lot of pressure to succeed. So I think it sounds like you had a really good combination, so that, at the end of the day, like you said, you were doing it for yourself. And that's sometimes the best motivation for something, right? When you feel like you know that you're doing it for yourself. And then when you succeed, the success, of achieving that goal almost tastes that much better, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by the way, don't get me wrong, because, I was diligent. And for example, in my master's, I got the second highest grade since the grades were in Latin. When I got it, I was like, okay, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And then the secretary there at the university, she looked at me with wide eyes. She was like, what grade did you get? I was like, okay, is it good? She was like, yeah, it's very good. So I definitely was able to deliver. But really, jokes aside, I think if you do something for the fact that you're interested in it, you're passionate about it, you're also gonna be it's gonna get easier for you to work harder and hustle when, in this case, in the academic world, whether it's when you have an exam or you have to write your thesis. And it ties into what I was talking about earlier about the fact that whenever I had to do something related to my podcasts, it never feels like, okay, this is a tedious task, because I like podcasting.
Well, it's funny when you compare putting a podcast episode together to writing like a master's or a thesis. I mean, it's probably like you're not going to get stressed out for writing show notes after having to put together a thesis.
Well, maybe I do get nervous about show notes, but I don't say it.
Well, can you explain what the Latin grading system is like for those who aren't familiar with it?
Man, are you serious? Now you're putting me on the spot. I should look for my papers. I don't remember. I can. Well,
I think just what's good or what's bad, because I think you didn't even. I think when you saw it at the first time, here we're used to, if it's on 100-point scale or
Right.
ABCDs.
Yeah.
Is it different there?
Yes, it is. I mean, the grade system, that's also something that is different, because, for example, in Switzerland, when, let's say, elementary school, secondary school, high school, the grading system goes from 2 to 6. So 6 is excellent, 5 is good, 4 is okay. If you get a 4, you pass the class, and then 3 is, bad, and 2 is like an F, basically, in the States. But then when I went to the university there for my bachelor's, they had a grading system similar to Italy. So it was from 1 to 10. So a completely different system. And when I came here to Finland, it was different. It was for the courses and stuff like that, it was from 1 to 5. But then the thesis is with this Latin grading. So I think with the thesis, there are maybe 6 levels. And for every level, there is a Latin word or a couple of Latin words. And I got the second highest level. So I'm not sure if in the case of the States, that would be like a B or a B plus or an A minus, something like that, I think.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah. People, again, it's another opportunity to get a peek into like, what's so funny about Americans sometimes is just we're so myopic because we all, I hope that's the right word, because we only understand things from our perspective, and I think it's really important, Jan, to experience other cultures, to see how how things are done, even something as simple as the way a grading scale is created, because I think it just allows us to expand our horizons, and good, multiple perspectives are good, and I think maybe, and you can tell me if this applies to you, but as you started doing the podcast and as you started having conversations with people, I think having a mindset and having the benefit of that you have of speaking multiple languages, it's sort of like it gives you a perspective where you're open to many ideas, and many opinions, as opposed to just being set in one. And I'm wondering if you found that to be the case because of your experiences that enriched the conversations you've been having lately on your show.
That's a great question, Harry. I mean, first of all, I have to say that my podcasts are in English, even though in some cases I interview somebody who, people can tell is not my mother tongue, even though I've studied in English. My master's, I've worked in English here in Helsinki as a journalist and back in Switzerland. And also my bachelor's thesis, even though I studied in Italian, I decided to write it in English. But my podcasts are in English. And I have to say that I've had some interviews with people from, for example, from Italy or from France or from, try to think other countries where English is not the mother tongue. And I don't know, probably I wouldn't say that the fact that I speak several languages has enriched so much, for the fact that English is anyway the common language that we use on our websites, or if we write a book, it's often written in English. And I'm actually planning to probably launch a podcast in Italian, because the other day I was thinking to myself that I'm sharing a lot of stuff in English on my podcast, the 360 Entrepreneur. I'm like, well, but since I speak Italian, why not leverage that and maybe try to do an Italian version of that show, or a completely new show. So I may leverage the language skills more. But in my experience so far, I have to say that that's something I probably should leverage more, because it hasn't really, let's say, broadened my point of view or my guest's point of view. But what you were saying earlier about the importance of really exploring different cultures and whatever. That's so true. And we have the luck today that with the internet, we have the opportunity to really get to know anything we want, whether it's another culture, is the history of the castle of Locarno, whatever we want to learn about. And I think that's something we should really leverage also when we're thinking maybe to start a podcast or start a business. Think about really the value of technology and how we can really leverage that to our advantage.
Thank you. I think there is opportunities in new markets, because obviously podcasting is so hot right now. But you are at an advantage, because if you could literally take your 360 Entrepreneur podcast and turn it into the Italian version, and you'll have a whole new audience, or some variation of that, because you're learning and you're seeing what's working and what's not for the American market. And like I said, we're so far ahead, but these other markets are going to come on board, whether it happens next year or in 5 years. And I think
exactly.
And you could, you could be the pioneers in those space, the early bird. You could be the Pat Flynn of the Italian podcast world, So, because, just if you think about it, what he did was just, he started really early and he just went at it with a passion, and he spoke about something that he enjoyed. And even though he wasn't podcasting 10 years ago, still, whatever it was, 5 years ago at this point, it was still new enough. And I think,
right,
not that you need another podcast on your plate, but it's something, it's something to keep in mind. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I'm wondering why you chose the topic of entrepreneurs, because I know that entrepreneurship is really big here in the States,
Mhm.
and then as you get to other parts of the world, it's funny. It's sometimes I've seen or heard comments or spoken to people from other countries, and they're like, "Wow, Americans really have this entrepreneurial spirit. They're go-getters, and this is it's something that's like in our DNA." So I'm wondering if, why you chose that topic, and what was your inspiration for starting a podcast on that topic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think is a great question, and there is some truth in what you just told us about the, you guys Americans being go-getters, being kind of with the entrepreneurial mindset. And for example, I can see that now living in Helsinki, or Finland as a country, which is a country that, in terms of technology, is really advanced. I mean, people know Nokia. There are quite many also software companies with the Rovio, with the Angry Birds and all those kind of things. And there is also a pretty thriving community of creative people, photographers, designers, and all these kind of things. Now, when it came to start a podcast, it's so that when I started out, I was really thinking, okay, what is the number one thing I could talk about? People often tell, yeah, you should be super specific and this and that, which is true. But what if you don't have that super specific topic yet? What should you do? Should you just sit down and wait until you get it? No, you should get started. So to me, what I thought is like, okay, so these are the people whose content I've been consuming, who I've been following, who I enjoy what they're doing, and they have kind of different nuances, because, for example, somebody can be the Instagram expert. For example, my friend Subi Zimmerman. So she talks about Instagram. Somebody else could be talking about webinars. So another person could be talking about podcasting. So I thought, okay, all these things are things that I'm interested in, are things that I think that are important for entrepreneurs to get an idea of what those things are. Because I always tell my community three principles that I really live by in this day and age, where it's so easy, as we were saying, to really get information, but there is also an information overload. I always do three things. Whether I learn something from a podcast like Podcast Junkies, or I read a book, or I watch a YouTube video, a virtual summit, whatever, I always do three things. When I get a piece of advice, I do. The first thing I do is I actually test it, because it's not that if the expert who's sharing the advice got some results, it doesn't mean that if I take the exact same process to what I do, I'm going to get the same results. So the first step I always do is a test. The second is keep track of analytics, of the numbers, depending on the kind of quote unquote experiment I want to do. So that keeping I'm not a big fan of data, but data is important because it gives me or paints a picture and tells me whether the test is working, how it is working, if it's not working. And the third step is really analyzing the data so that I can either tweak the test so that it can actually have a better impact, or move on to the next thing. So those are the things I do. And to kind of answer your question without ranting too much, I would say also to really anybody who's here with you and I who's thinking about starting a podcast, I think is okay to get started with a topic that it's kind of generic. In some people's eyes can be generic, because as you get the experience, as you get interviews, as you start to interact with people, you're going to start to see what you really want to focus on. And for example, that's why now for the last maybe, so my podcast is a year old. For the last maybe 9 months or so, I've been really drilling down on podcasting. And I know you have been also, and thank you, by the way, Harry, you have been sharing sometimes some of my episodes related to podcasting. So how I came up with that is, I got the experience, I connected with people, I talked with people, and also so that as I had a podcast, I was exposed to people. Some people started to see me as their podcasting go-to guy. So they started to ask me questions and questions and questions and questions and questions. And that made me realize that, hey, podcasting is something that I'm really enjoying doing. Is really opening many doors for me, and people are really asking me questions. So that's definitely something to capitalize on. So that would be also my advice for anybody who's thinking about starting a podcast, but is like, well, all these experts talk about being super specific. Their riches are in the niches. So what should I do? Should I wait?
I'm wondering, as you've done the show and you've had experience with the jazz podcast and interviewing, but I'm wondering if you look back and you think about episode 1 with 360 Entrepreneur and to the latest episode you recorded, what do you think is the one skill set in which you've improved the most?
I would say that the answer to that question, Harry, is pretty easy, and is the comfort level. I mean, I often use the slogan, your show, your rules. And I think that as one does interviews, one feels comfortable. And I can see it also. Sometimes I'm interviewed by new podcasters, and I'm always a person who's happy to help. If somebody reaches out to me, I'm always happy. If I have a time slot available, I'm always happy to be interviewed. I don't really care about their audience, download numbers, whatever. I like to help out and connect with people. And I can tell that they're kind of, even though, it's like if I'm a guest at somebody else's home, but I'm kind of more comfortable in their home than they are. So I think that's definitely the thing. I would say that now I'm super comfortable, and it's comes, as I said, with the experience, but now it's so that there isn't really any type of person, regardless of their prestige, that makes me feel like, okay, I'm nervous, regardless of whether it's an artist or if it's a New York Times bestselling author. I've interviewed all kinds of quote-unquote celebrities or influencers, however you want to call them. And once you start to feel comfortable with your show, you really realize that, hey, this is my show, this is my rules. It's fine to make, for example, in my case, English is not my mother tongue. I have a funny accent. I have to tell you, Harry, because this is something also for listeners who are non-English native speakers. When I started out, I was thinking, man, and my English, I have a very high level of English, but, it's not perfect. Sometimes I make mistakes, and then I realize, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, hey, that's fine. That's who I am. And in over 150 interviews that I've done, not a single person has, criticized me for a language mistake or grammar mistake. And in fact, with some guests, they even told me, you know what, I really like your accent. So we had a good laugh about it. So if somebody's here with you and I, and maybe he or she is thinking about starting a show, but it's like, well, it's not my mother tongue and this and that, I'm like, just get out there and get started, and you're going to start to get comfortable. And then you're going to reach a point where you're going to be, you know what, Yann was right. This is my show, my rules, so I really can host it in any way I want.
That's fantastic advice, and I think inspirational to people who are on the fence and tend to overthink the starting point about when is the right time. And I always, we always hear it so many times. The best time to start was yesterday. The second best time is today. I'm wondering also if, because you've had the show for a while, but because you have family members, this part fascinates me a little bit, and I'm the same way because I'm Latino. So can you tell me how you would explain what you do to someone who's like an older member of your family? Because sometimes that's the biggest challenge to people, because remember, it's people that know nothing about podcasting. So I'm curious, I've had some interesting experiences with that. I'm wondering if you could tell me about one of yours.
Yeah, sure. I actually can share. I have I have only a grandparent left, which is my mom's mom. And I'm sorry, Harry, but I have to share this anecdote because I don't remember, she's maybe 75 or something like that. But she's like, I would sign up right now if I had her, when I'm 75, I could be like that. When I was in Switzerland, sometimes I would send her a text, hey, Grandma, do you want to go grab a cup of coffee? I would get no answer. After a week, I would get a text, sorry, I just came back from Uruguay. All right. After a couple of months, same situation. Oh, sorry, I just got back from Ireland. So she's really savvy. She uses Facebook. She's really active. And whenever I go to Switzerland, obviously I want to see her. And she asks me, so you, what is it that you do? You have blogs, right? So every time she asks me, yeah, you have blogs. So kind of the, how can I put it in a nice way? Well, let's say that the way I put it, I say, when I want to refer to podcasting, I say that, yeah, I have a show similar to a radio show and I do interviews. That's kind of the way I put it for people who I know aren't, don't know the first thing about podcasting.
That's very funny. Well, the fact that she sounds like she's having a great life. She's traveling, jet setting around the world. I'm not sure that there's a lot of 70-plus-year-old grandmothers that could say they're traveling different parts of the country or different countries as frequently as she does. So that's great to see that she's living life, and I'm sure she's an inspiration for you as well. Can you tell me something that you've changed your mind about recently?
Related to what?
Anything.
That I've changed my mind about. That's a good question. Well, yeah, I mean, I can tell you, we were talking a bit here before recording. It's so that now that I'm organizing the Podcast Success Summit, as I was telling you, I kind of was focusing, or not focusing, but spending too much of my time on those who were doing me, quote unquote, wrong. So in my case, for example, it's so that I'm organizing this podcast success summit, and Harry, you are one of the speakers, and thank you, by the way, again for being part of this great event. And it's so that I'm interviewing over 70 speakers. So that's quite a lot. That's people, and it's people from all over the world. So for example, today, I had the first interview of the day was at 8 a.m. my time. So, and now it's evening here my time. So, sometimes that's how it works. And the problem I've had, and that's so kind of where I had this mental switch in a way, is that some of the people like you, Harry, I reached out, we talked, you say, yeah, sure, we scheduled, we recorded, that's it, good, perfect. When other people told me a month ago, even 2 months ago, yeah, sure, count me in. And I said, okay, fine. And then when I reach out to them and I ask them, okay, please make sure that you pick a date for the interview. They don't pick a date. I don't hear from them. So I have to follow up. And basically, by me focusing or spending too much time running after them, I kind of, in a way, neglected people like you, Harry. So I owe you definitely an apology. And all the people who I know really are excited about the summit. They see the potential in it. They see that it's going to be something that actually helps people and provides value. So that's probably the thing where actually today happened, that switch where I was really like, oh man, I should have focused less on those people and focus more on the people who kind of are interested. And this, I think it's also a lesson for everybody who, may be out there, and you may have, for example, somebody criticizing your podcast, let's say, or your product or whatever. It's great to have feedback, because feedback helps us, improve anything we do. But it's also important to remembering that by focusing too much on haters, we do a disservice to those who are actually care about us and are excited whenever we publish a new podcast episode, or whenever we send them an email, or whatever we do. So that's a switch I had, and it's something that I think can also help people understand the importance of kind of focusing on the right things and the right people, rather than kind of wasting, because at the end of the day, it's a waste of our time and maybe also other people's time by focusing on the quote unquote wrong kind of people.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you can maybe say that if it wasn't for the work that you're doing around the podcast summit, that you wouldn't have had the ability to go through this experience and have that aha moment that says, where you should be putting your priorities, and the fact that, there are people sometimes that will let you down. And that's just more of a reason why you should focus on the people who are there, who are supporting you, who have your back. And I think those are the types of lessons that you're going to carry through for future projects as well.
No, you're right, especially because even though I mean I'm all about collaboration at all levels, but it's so that many things I do is often by myself as a solopreneur. For example, when I do my coaching, podcasting coaching, it's like me and the client. So in that sense, I kind of go by my own agenda or obviously the client's agenda as well. But like you said, this has definitely been an experience, especially because this first experience has been already on such a larger scale where I immediately had to coordinate 70 plus different people from all kind of countries and time zones and whatever. But that's definitely something that has helped a lot. And you're right, and it tells that whenever we put ourselves a little bit in an uncomfortable position, when we step outside our comfort zone, we really learn a lot. And also we see that, hey, at the end of the day, it isn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. Because in my case, for example, it's so that I don't have the kind of the fear of being on video anymore, because sometimes I've recorded some videos for my YouTube channel and stuff like that. However, with the summit, it's so that every session is a video session, and I said over 70 speakers, so the speakers come and go, but I am the common denominator. So, I'm on camera every single session. So it's important, that I kind of try to do a good job. But that's something that before starting recording, I thought a bit, I wonder how it's going to be, how I'm going to feel. But, I try to remember what I say, your show, your rules, and I've had nothing but great times talking with people like you, Harry.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I always tell people, create the show that you want to hear. You're going to repel people who are just not into your content, your voice, your message, your guests.
And that's okay.
And you want to push them away. Yann, what I say is as quickly as possible, because they're not your tribe. Right. And so, but the people that do get your jokes, who laugh at what you say, and get your humor, and love your accent, they're the ones that are going to keep coming back, and those actually become like your really passionate fans, and those are the ones who are going to support you. And a lot of times, what you'll find is those are the ones who actually defend you as well, because they're like, no, Yann's show is really good, and his accent is an asset, and his outgoing personality is something I look forward to every week.
Harry, I have to say, you got me there for a moment, because when you say his accent is an ass, I was thinking, okay, where is this going? And then asset, I was like, okay. I was like, oh, here it comes. Asset, okay.
That's funny. What is the most misunderstood thing about you?
That's a deep question. I would say that something I've probably learned, and this has been both through my being, growing up as a teenager, going to high school and all those kind of things, as well as in the army, because it's so that in Switzerland, going to the army, if you're a man, is compulsory. So when I was in I think we can call it army school or whatever, it's so that it's interesting because and that's about the army. It's something I remember really well. People got a bad first, they saw me, they had a bad impression. For example, it's so that the very first day I went to I had to report there. It's so that it wasn't around the corner. I had to go all the way across country, over 4 hours by train. And surprise, surprise, I almost never feel sick. There may be one day a year where already when I wake up, I can tell, okay, I'm not feeling good. That was the day. So you can imagine feeling super bad. You still have to go over 4 hours and a half by train. You're still. So basically, when I got there, I was feeling super bad. I needed to go to the bathroom and vomit and all this kind of thing. And people who have never saw me before thought, okay, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Because I was really feeling bad. And that was probably one of the worst days I ever had, for the fact that that first day is the day where it's really long because they give you all the equipment and all this kind of thing. So there are a lot of queues. And so I was, queuing, started to feel bad, go to the bathroom, blah, blah, blah. So there, those who then became my friends and stuff like that, some people even told me, you're one of the best guys I know. But I have to tell you, the first day I was really thinking, yeah, this guy, who is this guy? And even one of my superiors told me, yeah, I thought you were going to be like a quitter or stuff like that. So that's what happened. And then when I changed base, again, the captain there got a bad first impression of me. And at the end of the kind of school or whatever you want to call that, asked me kind of if I wanted to continue in the army and become, kind of a sergeant or whatever. So that has really showed me that oftentimes people may get the first wrong impression of you. And by the way, my fiance is the same. The first time we met, she was a bit like, okay, who's this guy and blah, blah, blah. But I think that has really taught me that once you know who you are, and you believe in what you do, in this case, if we talk about a podcast, if you really believe in your podcast, you should never feel worried about what people have to say. For example, if you go, let's say you go to podcast movement, for example, and you start to talk with people and you kind of feel like a fish out of water because, 99% of the people, they have, I don't know, an interview-based show and you don't, or, a pre-recorded show and you don't, and you feel a bit weird, or somebody thinks a bit like, okay, who is this guy or what is this show? I think that once you feel comfortable with yourself, you're gonna do great. But I would say that often that has happened to me a few times where I kind of, people got the wrong idea of me, especially, and this is funny because all the situations have been in a non-business related context. Like when it's about business, everybody's like, yeah, this is like super friendly, super nice, blah, blah, blah. But in those situations, and I'm not sure why, but that's something I've definitely learned, that you're going to come across people, even potential clients, who may get a weird vibe about you. And that's okay. You shouldn't try to, be anybody but yourself. And like you were saying earlier, with some people, you're going to resonate, and those are the people you should focus on. With some people you won't, and that's okay. You shouldn't try to be everybody's friend, especially if somebody, isn't really feeling friendly toward you.
That's fantastic advice. And I think it's something we don't hear enough. And I think the more people who are going through challenges hear that don't let people get you down because they've got you wrong on the first impression, or don't feel like you have to make, you won't always have a chance to make a great first impression. But I think if you're consistent, who you are as a person is eventually going to come out. Like you said, you weren't feeling well those first days, but that really wasn't who you were. That wasn't your character. And I think it's good that you had people around you who are willing to say, let's see the whole picture about Yann. Let's not just say one day is going to make me decide who you are. And I think that's fantastic advice just in life in general, and just to give people an opportunity sometimes to prove to you who they are and what their character is about. So I think that's a great story that you just told.
But and also for oneself, Harry, because, after some time that you meet people, blah, 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 you're going to start to get an idea of, okay, this person, we are clicking with this person, probably not so much. So then also for you, that's going to be something that really helps you becoming more of a people's person in a way, or becoming a better reader of speakers. And sometimes you're going to think to yourself, okay, so this person thinks that I'm like that. Yeah, by the end of the day or by the end of the call, whatever, they're going to see that, well, actually, I'm maybe the opposite of what I thought or what they thought I was.
That must have been some interesting times in the army. I'm sure you have a bunch of stories from there as well.
I sure do.
We'll have to pick those up next time we meet, and you can tell me some of those as well.
Yeah, podcast movement.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to it. So we'll wrap this up, but I'm wondering if you could let people know a bit about what you have coming up in terms of the podcast summit, a bit more details about that, because that's something that people might be interested in attending.
Yeah, sure. So the name Podcast Success Summit kind of gives it away that is a virtual summit for podcasters. But here's the thing: so by the time we're recording this, I've recorded about 50 of the sessions. So most of the sessions are already recorded. And I can definitely say with confidence that the Podcast Success Summit is for you if you are here with Harry and I, and you've been thinking about starting a podcast, but for whatever reason you haven't. It's also for you if you're already podcasting and you're looking for strategies, lessons, resources for growing your podcast, growing your email list through your show, look at how you can build authority with your show, and also different ways to monetize your podcast beyond the traditional sponsorship level. So that's where I really want to put emphasis, because I think that some people go into podcasting with the monetization aspect in mind, and that's something I discourage people from doing. But also it's so that some people think that podcast monetization equal sponsorships. And we hear all these success stories from John Lee Dumas, who is going to be the closing keynote speakers, and many, many others. And then we think, well, I'm going to do the same. And we may focus or be super obsessed about downloads or all these kind of things. So on the summit, you're going to hear about different ways you can actually leverage your podcast to generate revenue. So if you have a podcast, or if you're thinking about starting a podcast, the event is for you. But the event is even for you if you're an entrepreneur, a coach, an artist, a speaker, and you are looking for leveraging the power of podcasting, not as a host, but as a guest. So if you really want to learn how you can be seen as an authority, you can get exposure, you can grow your email list and your business by being a podcast guest, we're going to have some sessions specifically on that. So it's really targeted advice from where to look for podcasts, how to reach out to podcasts, to, okay, they told me yes, so now what? How can I make sure that I rock the interview? So if you're one of those in one of those three categories, the summit is definitely for you. And is online, is a free event, and it's going to take place from May 16th to June 9th. And as I said, over 70 speakers. So obviously we have Harry, we have John Lee Dumas, we have New York Times bestselling authors Joel Comm, we have Jay Baer, and really so many great speakers. And I have to say, I've managed to bring on the summit speakers from all over the world. So we have people from Australia, from England, from New Zealand, from Africa, and people who sometimes we may not really hear about, but are doing incredible things. So I know that you're going to have the link in the show notes. It's something I would encourage really anybody to do, because also it's free to sign up. So just sign up, and if you see it's not for you, you can definitely say, well, thanks, but no thanks. But if podcasting is at the back of your mind in any shape or form, the Podcast Success Summit is really going to help you take your podcasting levels to the next level, or successfully launch your podcast, or becoming a great podcast guest.
And I think we're going to create a special URL for listeners of this show. And so what the URL for the actual summit is podcastsuccesssummit.org?
Net.
.net.
No,
okay.
.net, yes.
Okay, so podcastsuccesssummit.net/Harry. Does that sound?
Exactly.
We can do that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So that's the link to keep in mind, and it's so that once you sign up, you're gonna get emails, and every day you're gonna get an email with access to different sessions. So there's gonna be all the sessions are available for you to watch for free for 3 days. Every session is free, and obviously there is one that I really, really want you to make sure that you mark down on your calendar, which is the one with Harry. So podcastsuccesssummit.net/Harry, and then make sure to let everybody know. And obviously you're going to be the first to know when the summit starts and when the session with Harry is available.
Perfect. So if they want to just get in contact with you in general and see what else is going on with you and with your podcast, where else can people reach you?
Well, when you sign up for the summit, I'm actually the one who replies to your email. So that's the email address I use. I always share it. So my email is Yann, so that's YANN at yannilunga.com. So I know, Harry, you'll have it in the show notes. But that's also my site, yannilunga.com. And you can find me really anywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter. But if you go to the summit and you sign up, you're going to get an email autoresponder from me. So just reply. And, I always try my best to reply to every single email. So there isn't any robot. I don't use any assistant for managing my communication. So it's definitely Yann who's going to be chatting with you.
Very cool. Well, Yann, thank you so much for your openness, your energy, your enthusiasm. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope the listener got a lot out of it. I was really happy to learn a bit more about you and your background. And I always think it's fascinating to dig a bit deeper into the personalities behind the shows. And so I'm glad we had the chance to talk.
Man, this was one of the most fun I had. So thank you for having me, and hope to see you in Locarno someday.
Yeah, that sounds good. But if maybe before then, podcast movement. But then Locarno is now on the radar.
Right.
Thanks so much. So I really hope you enjoyed that conversation, that you got to know a little bit more about Yann, and you really understand how smart he is and how much I respect him as a podcaster, as an entrepreneur, as a human being. He's really got this really positive energy about him, and we do these conversations via Skype video. So, he just always had a smile on his face for like the whole conversation. And I think you can hear that too in his voice when he's talking. He knows how to live life. And I'm really happy we got to chat for a bit, and I can call him a friend now. And I'm really happy to support him and be a part of his podcast, Mastery Summit. And I hope you check that out as well. And I hope you check out his podcast. We'll have all those details in the show notes. So this episode is brought to you by CastSource. So I know that a lot of podcasters understand the importance of repurposing content and converting your existing audio into a full transcript, because, guys, this is a great way for you to increase the visibility of the show. I know some people are on the fence about it, but I can't stress enough how many times I've repurposed content from a transcription for a client and had it pay off huge dividends. Once it's transcribed, you can reformat it. You can put it into a nice white paper format, which one of my clients does. You can put it on a space like medium.com, which I have clients do as well. All those are fantastic places to get visibility, but it starts with the transcription, and it starts with a partner that really takes pride in their work. Their accuracy is over 99%. They can give you the formatting suitable for any output that you want. If you wanted an HTML format, if you wanted in a PDF, you just wanted in a straight up text file, they'll do all of that. They're really, really accommodating. I've been working with them for some time now, and I can't say enough good things about them. The turnaround is within 24 to 48 hours. The rates are extremely competitive. I know there's a top brand transcriber out there with fixed rates. CastSource has rates that will go down if you get enough transcriptions done with them. So CastSource, check them out at podcastjunkies.com/CastSource and let them know that Harry sent you. And I hope if you're not doing transcriptions, I hope you'll give them a shot with your first couple, and you won't be disappointed by the service and by the level of professionalism that the team over there has with regards to this. So I'm really happy that they're one of the newest sponsors for Podcast Junkies, and that's why I have this long promotion for them. But it's one of the first ones, and I really wanted to give you guys a background as to why I signed up with them, and why I'm really supporting them. I'm really crazy about what they do. The show is a member of Podcastica, If you don't know what Podcastic is, it's a collection of 10 other podcasts that are dominating the podcasting world. We have fan shows. We have the newest, the podcast producers with Corey and Jessica. We have shows about meditation, and we're growing. And they're all fantastic. All the hosts are fantastic. At this point, I've interviewed them all on Podcast Junkies. Regular listeners will know that. So check it out, podcastica.com. Working on the site revamp, so stay tuned for that. It's coming shortly, I promise. Intro and outro music was composed by Cedar and Soil. Check them out at cedarsoil.com. So you stayed this far and you want to know what the retention hashtag is. That's a very, very good question. This week, because Yann is from Locarno, I think we'll just hashtag the city Locarno. So it's hashtag Locarno, Locarno, and hashtag and tag Yann and tag myself, and let us know that you made it this far. That would be fantastic. Thanks, guys. Have a fantastic week. Stay tuned next week where I have another international podcaster on the show. Who can it be? Tell people about the show. Subscribe, rate, and review, all that good stuff. But more importantly, spread the word about Podcast Junkies. Wherever you can. It's appreciated. Have a fantastic week.